Hello, I'm Jennifer Lee, Senior Admin Evangelist at Salesforce, and welcome to July's Automate This. So with the warmer weather, you're taking time off, so you might not be able to watch this live. Totally get it, no worries, we got you covered. Watch Automate This when you can, video on demand, back on the same page. And engage with us during the live stream, in the chat, or in the comments after. Now, the best way to be notified when we live stream is to set a reminder on the live stream episode page, and you get an email reminder on the day of the event. Now, to interact with us during the live stream, post your comments in the chat and interact with other viewers. And to engage me or my guest presenters, start your question with a Q colon so that we can quickly scan through and identify and answer your questions. So here's what you will learn in today's episode from our two guest presenters. 3 things you will learn from Christina. Automatically run a screen flow when a user logs into Experience Cloud. Only run a screen flow the first time a user logs into Experience Cloud. And update the user's related contact record based on the information gathered in the screen flow. Now here's what you're going to learn from Anne. Use Flow to self-register Experience Cloud portal users, gather user information using screen flows, and create user contact account and other related records. So today we're going to talk about how to gather information from our Experience Cloud users with Flow, whether they're internally created users, customers, or partners accessing Experience Cloud via portal. So I'm excited to be joined by 2 Trailblazers, Christina, Nava, and Powell. Welcome, Christina and Anne, to Automate This.
Thank you. Really enjoying being here. Thank you.
Same here.
All right, so we're going to start with you first, Christina. It's great to be collaborating with you again. Christina was a guest on my How I Solved It. And if you didn't watch the video, check it out via the URL that you see on the screen below. So question for you, Christina. How did you learn Flow?
So this is an interesting story. So I built my first Flow basically January, February of 2019, basically when Flow switched over to the new Flow Builder and became easier. And the first Flow I ever built was a login flow. I was having a lot of trouble with it because, again, I was very new to all this. So I reached out to some fellow community group users, and he walked me through how to do it. And I fell in love with flows right then and there. They're amazing.
I love how the community just steps in and helps each other out. That's awesome. Now, what cool automation solutions have you built outside of that login flow?
Okay. So first of all, I have 2 that I have as subflows that I think are very fascinating. One of them takes the values from a multi-pick list and turns it into a collection within your flow so that you can loop through them more easily. I built that a while back and I use it constantly, never thought I would. Another subflow I use is gathering the active pick list values so that if you're trying to write to a record and there's an inactive pick list value, your flow doesn't just fail on you, it will actually tell you why. Then a couple of flows that I'm using those in One of them is we do quote approvals. Instead of just whenever they click the button sending it to the approval, I go through this huge long process of seeing, does it really need approval? And what we're doing is we're comparing previous subscriptions to current subscriptions, previous values to current values. We're doing a whole lot of comparisons before we say, all right, yes, it actually does need to go. And then I tell the approver why it needs approval. So it's saving them a lot of time. And then I think another cool one, which piggybacks off of what we're going to show today, is we have providers that we match with clients. And our therapist providers, we're having to spend a lot of time and going through, okay, the clients have these requirements for what they want in a provider, and their providers have these things that they can do. So you'll see like times that they can give sessions, what languages they speak, etc. And they're having to spend hours each week comparing them side by side to find a good match. And I wrote a flow that's a screen flow that basically says, okay, this client can match with these providers and pick the one you want. And it's saving them 5 to 10 hours a week with that one flow.
Wow, I love that. Um, so you mentioned the word subflow. So for those out there who are wondering, what's a flow? Like, I'm just learning flows. What's a subflow? So can you describe what that is?
Absolutely. So a subflow is typically a smaller flow, a smaller piece of code, if you want to call it that, that does something that you do a lot. So then you're able to actually have an element on your flow that calls that subflow, and you're typically passing it a piece of information and then getting a piece of information back from it. So it's a way for you to reuse the same thing over and over again without having to actually re-put it in every single one of your flows. Saves you a lot of time.
I love admins who work smarter, not harder, right?
Yes.
Well, thanks for sharing your cool flow solutions.
You're
So
welcome.
now we're going to go over to Anne. Hey, Anne, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Now, can you tell us how you got started in your flow journey?
Yeah. So, also a fun story. It was the first time that I had actually had an opportunity to join the ecosystem was through like learning flow. Um, I got out of Pep Up Tech, which is how I got my start in
Yay.
Salesforce, and then I think around the last week that I was in the cohort for Pep Up Tech, I got approached to actually make a flow in order to be basically my technical interview for this position that I was really wanting. Um, the only thing was this flow that they wanted. The first thing that they told me when telling me the use case was, I don't even know if this is possible. Um, so, taking that, I kind of took it as a challenge. And basically, what they wanted was just to switch page layouts and record types whenever the stage is moved forward, which, yes, I know it's not a very great use case for realistic stuff, processes, but I think they just wanted to test my actual capability for learning flows. And through a lot of trial and error, I think it took me about a week to finally understand how to do it. Very first flow ever, but I did it. And ever since then, despite like having tons of time just panicking about what I'm going to do with this, I succeeded and fell in love with flow ever since then.
Wow, I love that story. You were up for the challenge and you met it. That's awesome. Now, what other cool flows have you built since?
Yeah, so I now have built quite a few flows since then. My specialty is actually self registration. But aside from the one I'm going to be talking about today, a different kind of self registration that I've actually done is through record triggered flows instead of a screen flow, which is what we're going to talk about today. So that was a really fun one to figure out because there's a very different process to making that compared to a screen flow, which was fun trying to figure out. But other than that, I have made a flow that actually lets users in the Salesforce UI control queue members without having to even go into the setup. I have also made it possible to use campaigns to post events to the portal website for portal users to actually RSVP to it, and it can create campaign members in the back end. So that was another fun one that was really hard to figure out, but very rewarding in the process.
Yeah, you and Christina have really cool flow solutions. We're going to need to like loop back and bring you both back to show off these solutions. Awesome.
Yeah, happy to help.
All right, so we're back here with you, Christina. Can you share with us your use case and solution?
Absolutely. So the use case we had is, as I mentioned previously, we match providers with clients and we help provide therapy and coaching. So when we would have a provider join us, their contractors, they would have to fill out a Google sheet with all of this information, with all of their what we call session preferences. And this was taking a lot of their time, and then we would have to take the time to input that into Salesforce. So what I decided to do instead was, obviously, these providers are logging into a partner Experience Cloud portal. And I decided that whenever they logged in for the first time, we would just ask them all of these questions. So this allowed them to fill out that information themselves, which they were already doing with the Google Sheet, but it's now saving our team time because we don't have to translate that into Salesforce. I will say another great thing you can do with this solution is I'm going to show you how you're only going to run it the first time that they log in. But the nice thing is this is just a simple checkbox on a user record, so that 6 months to a year down the road, if we want them all to update their information, all we have to do is just uncheck that box. And again, the next time they log in, they have to fill it all out again, or at least verify it. So this is going to be a reusable solution, even though it looks like they're only going to be using it once. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to walk you through the whole process. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to log in as a provider and show you what the flow looks like from their point of view. So I have my provider here that I'm logging in with. And so it's come to the portal site and it's finding this login flow, and we're going to go through a bunch of screens. So the first one here is I just want to say, hey, thank you. We're going to hit next. The next thing we're doing is this screen is just doing all of their kind of contact information. You can have as much on here as you would like, as much or as little. But I do want to point out that what I'm doing here for each one of these fields, I am bringing in the current value on their contact record. So if the information already exists, they don't have to re-enter it in. So we're saving them time here. So I'm just going to enter in some information. And go to our next screen. And this is where we're getting into those provider preferences. So again, this can be any question you want to ask. I'm just going to go through and run through some answers here. And hit next. And that's it. So we can go actually look at their contact record now. So you can see this is what it was. I pulled up the record. I have not refreshed it yet. So this is the information before the save. I'm going to now just refresh my tab, and we can see all this information has now populated. So let's walk through how this is done. This solution requires a field on the user record and then a screen flow that we add as a login flow. So again, the first step is we have this custom field on the user object. I called mine initial login complete, nice and simple, and it's just a checkbox. And if we go look on a user record, this is my partner right here. If we scroll down, we can see that field. Now again, this is a stale page. This is what it looked like before I ran through that flow. If I refresh it, we're going to see that this checkbox is now set to true. So that's important to know, that we have this checkbox on the user record. We want it to be false before the provider logs in for the first time, and the flow I'm about to show you is going to set it to true. And then after I show you the flow, we'll log in again, and you'll see how it's just going to skip past that flow. All right, so let's talk about the flow itself. This is a fairly simple flow. You can make it as complex as you would like, but I'm going to show you kind of the bare minimum you need to make this solution work. So what we're going to do is the first element after we come into our flow is we need to do a get on the contact record for the user who is running this flow. So in this case, the user is the provider logging into Experience Cloud. All partners have a contact record attached to their user record. So that's what we're getting right here. So find the contact whose ID matches the contact ID of the user. I'm going to jump right back to our user record, and we can scroll up and we can see right here, we have that contact record. And if we clicked on it, it would pull us up to this one. So that's what we're doing, is we're getting the contact record for the user who's running the flow. The next thing we need to do is twofold. It is a decision that's checking for two things. One, it's checking to make sure we actually found a contact. If we didn't, we're going to exit. So we're saying, hey, on this get user contact record, that contact ID, is it null? If it is not null, that means we found it. It's kind of like this double negative. You just have to get used to it. But is null false means we found one. Well, in addition to that, we're going to be checking for that flag, that checkbox on the user record. So again, this user right here, the initial login complete field, if that is false, then our decision element is true and we're going to move forward. If either one of them is basically false here, it's a little confusing, I know, we're going to exit. So if we did not find the contact, or if the initial login complete is true, we're going to do this default outcome, which means we exit the flow. But if either one of them is true, if both of them are true, we're going to keep going. So the first thing we're going to do is, I lost my mouse, there we go, sorry about that. Our first screen is just simply our welcome. We're not gathering any information here. This is just two display text fields. Sorry, display text and a display image. And the next screen is where we start gathering this information. So the first one is our contact. What I want to show you here is when I pulled over the name, right here, this is what's important. In that get user contact record element, I am saying I want you to display the first name. So this is how we're pre-populating this first name box with the first name from that contact. And scrolling down, we can see the same thing here for the last name. If I click on the mobile phone, we can see the same thing here in the value. We are pre-populating the mobile phone number from that contact record. Now, if there is no mobile phone, it'll just be empty. But if there is already one there, we're not going to make them type it in again. If you have never dealt with the address component, this one is a little bit trickier. So notice what I'm having to do here is I need to pre-populate the city value with the mailing city from that record, the country value with the mailing country, so on and so forth. So for the street, city, state, zip, and country, I am having to pre-populate each one of those individually. I can't just say, I want you to fill in all of these boxes with the mailing address. You can't do that. So you'll have to do them each individually. All right, and then my next screen is where I am getting those, what we call these session preferences. So this is what I'll be using in the future to match with the individual clients. So notice I'm going to say one more time, what I'm doing here is these have this default value and I'm pre-populating them with the values from that contact record. I'm just going to quickly kind of go through these so you can see that's what I've done for each one of them. All right, and then once we have added all of our components and added all of our default values, the next thing we need to do is we actually need to update the contact record with all of this. So we are going to do an assignment where we say, all right, on the contact record first name, I want you to update it with the first name that they entered here. Just in case they go by a nickname, etc. We want them to have the ability to change it. and I have added each one of our values. And then next thing is we just say, all right, update that contact record. So in the previous one, we are assigning the values to the fields, but we haven't really saved the record yet. This right here is where we're saving the record and the changes get saved to the database. Now the last part, which is super important, we then have to update the user record. So we're saying, all right, find me the user whose ID is the ID of the user running this. And then I want you to set that initial login complete field to true. So this is where we're flipping that flag so that next time they log in, it's just going to skip this flow and not make them do this every single time they log in. All right. After you've added all of your components, your next step when you do your save, and I'm just going to do it by going to my settings right here, we need to make sure that the flow runs in system context because we're updating that user record. And so we need to be able to give them access to update that flag on their user record. So this is an important thing to do right here. All right, so after you do that, I'm going to run you through the debug. So in case you've never seen a debug, we can look at that real quick. So we have saved it. Now this is an interesting thing that you can do in a sandbox, in a dev org, but you can't do it in production. We can actually debug this as another user. So I'm going to click on this and I'm going to search for, I don't have to because it's right here, but this is again my provider. Now I want you all to remember that we've already run through this once. So the flag is currently set to true. So when I debug this, sorry about that, this one right here, it just skips it. So if you look over on our debug details, we got the user record. We ran through our decision. So we did find the contact record, but the initial login complete is true. So because it isn't false, we're going the default outcome, which means we just skip it and exit out. So that's what happened right here. If we go set the user, we go back and uncheck this, save it, and then we go back and debug again using this run flow as another user. Now we actually go through all of the flow. So hit next. I'm going to skip most of this. Notice how I have not gone through and cleared those fields on my contact record. So as I go through this, we can see everything is already pre-populated, and I can very easily just skip past it all. So after you debug, as your partner, as your provider in my case, and everything is good to go, you're going to activate it. And then the last thing you need to do is from setup, you're going to type in login flows, which brings us to this screen. You'll click on new, and this is going to be a flow. Don't know if I can pick the same one. Yeah, I can't use the same one, so I'm just going to cancel out of this real quick and go back to here. But what I did was I picked my flow, and then here's a really cool fact is that this is per profile. So I can say, I want to run this just for this one profile here. So if you have customers and you have partners and you want to do this same kind of thing, you can have login flows for both of them. Another thing I want to point out in here is notice this user license as a partner community. If I can change this to any of these right here and run again a separate login flow per profile that uses that license. So that's it. And I'll go through and kind of show you one more time what it looks like from the user's point of view. If I go through here, I'm going to go back to my user record. Notice that this is set to true. So let's see what happens when we log back in. So logging in as my provider. and the flow runs, it's going to briefly say your flow finished, and we go straight back to here. If we went back and now unchecked that initial login complete box, set it to false, and logged in back in, we would go through the whole process again and allow them to update their fields. And that's my solution.
Great. I loved how you used login flow to do this, Christina. That was pretty great. All right, Anne, hello again. Now, can you show us your use case and solution?
Yes. So my use case was I had a client one time, or a couple of times actually, that would like to have an Experience Cloud portal for both partners and customers for different use cases, but they would like them to be able to self-register. Now, with self-registration in Experience Cloud, you can either use the standard self-registration tool, which is basically a couple of fields that you can fill out that has very basic information like the name, you can add the address, email, phone, and such. But past that, it doesn't really do as much. If you want to go past that and expand upon the functionality of self-registration, you would have to go through Apex or coding in order to do that. So I figured out a way to use allow self-registration for new Experience Cloud portal users using screen flows instead. This would basically look exactly like a normal screen flow would, but you would be able to allow users to input more information in there that you need and customize it as much as or as little as you want and gather as much information as you need when creating these records in the back end, as well as a user record, which is the main part here. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to demo what it's going to look like for our new portal users. Here I have a mock demo site. It's just a very standard Experience Cloud portal with some company branding. Since I am a new user, I do not have a username and password, so I will click the not a member. Now, once I click into that, this page is going to pop up here. It just houses that screen flow and has some information here with welcome and instructions on how to self-register. This is completely customizable, and for the sake of time, I actually went ahead and filled out the information ahead of time. So we have flow here, some information on flow, my email, and some company information as well. Once I have made sure that all of the required fields are filled in, and even some of the optional ones, I am going to sign up. And it lets me know that I have successfully signed up and to check my email. So let's go into my email, and right here, we actually see a welcome email from my portal site telling me to get started and go to this link. This link will actually take us to the password reset where I can create a new password. We're gonna go ahead and fill in just a random password here, change password, and I am in. This is the portal site as an authenticated user. Now, in that email, also listed is a username for the new user to actually keep in mind as well. Now, let's see what this looks like in the back end. Here, I'm going to look for a flow, and there she is, or they are. Let's go ahead and look at the details and confirm that everything is filled in. Yep, and go into the account, and that information is also filled in. How did I do this? Well, let us go into the screen flow that I've made. So very first thing when you are making this screen flow is in your properties for the flow, you are going to want to make sure that you run the flow within system context without sharing. So very similar to Christina, you need to be able to give that guest user access to all the records to be able to create that user contact and account record. Otherwise, they will hit an error while going through the flow. So do make sure to set that as the first thing that you do once you are creating your self-registration flow. So once we do that, the first element you are going to put is a screen. That is the sign up screen that I showed you earlier with all the input information that we want to collect from the user. You can customize this as much as you want, but you do need to make sure to add information in for, at the very least, the email, last name, and any fields that are required on the contact or account objects. So once we have that sign up screen done and you have the email field filled out by the user, we are going to check to see if that user already exists in the system. So the first thing is we do a get records on the user object with the filter of email matches the email input field that you put in that screen. We only need the first record since there should only be one user record that has that email within your system since they are a new user. And the only fields that we need from this particular record is the ID field and the is active field. Once we have that, we will do a decision element to check to see if they actually do exist or if they are a new user. So if they are a new user, that would mean that the get user record that I have is empty. So get user, user ID is null equals true. That means it is blank. So if it is not blank, it's going to go through the default outcome of existing user, meaning it found a record. So first, let's go in and see what the outcome is like for the existing user. We then go into another decision element to check whether that user found is inactive or not. So if it is inactive, that get user record is going to check that is active field and see whether it is true or false. If they are inactive, it will say false. And if it is true, it's going to go down the default outcome of active user. If they are an inactive user, we are going to update their user record to show that they are now active. So we do a get records or update records on the user object with the ID matching the ID from the get user record. And then the field values are going to be is active equals true. Once we have reactivated that user, we'll just tell them that we have reactivated it and to log in or use the forgot password tool. If they are already active, then we just tell them that we found their account and to, again, log in and use the forgot password tool. So if they are a new user, the first thing we have to do is make sure that we can actually create this user using the self-registration flow. And to check if we can, we need to make sure that we have enough licenses of the correct type available for them to use. So we'll do a get records on the user license object with the name matching whichever license you are intending to use. So for this use case, I use partner community login, but you can also use customer community login or something like that. I only need the first record that pops up. And then the fields that I need from this particular get records is the total licenses and the use licenses. This is so that we can create a formula for available licenses. This basically just subtracts the used licenses from the total licenses so that we can have the number of available licenses in the system. That formula is going to be used within this decision, and it's basically going to check whether, if it's available, that formula is going to be greater than 0. If it is equal to or less than 0, it will go down the default outcome of unavailable. So if it is unavailable, then it goes down this pathway and we tell them that we cannot create an account for them at this time and to contact support for more assistance. But you can always change up the display text here so it can be as customized as you want. And if it is available, the next thing that we need to do is to figure out what their username and nickname needs to be. So usernames and nicknames need to be unique for the user. For nicknames, it needs to be unique in your org, but for usernames, it needs to be unique throughout Salesforce. The way to resolve that, since we can't exactly double check just like how we do in the setup when we are creating new users, it tells us whether this is truly a unique username. We can't do that really through Flow. The way to get around that, though, is by creating a base username formula. Now, what that looks like is this. It looks scary, I know, but the main focus here is this domain name at the end. Since usernames need to be in email format, the domain name needs to be something very specific and unique to your org or your use case. So for example, I used @automatethis.com. The chances of that being another person's domain name outside of my org is extremely low. So that is the reason why I chose this particular domain name for it, so that I can prevent as many possibilities for hitting that unique username error as possible. For this, on the other hand, this left first name one is just taking the first initial plus a dot and then the last name and making sure that it's all in 60 characters or less. This substitute is just making sure that if there are any blank spaces, for example, if your first name is Anne space Marie, then it's going to take out that space in between and condense them together. And then this lower is just making sure that all of the entirety of this username is going to be in lowercase format. So if I were the one signing up, it would look like a.powell@automatethis.com. So once you have that formula done, the base user or base nickname is going to be very similar. We do not need a domain name in here, and it just needs to be unique within your org. So we are just taking the first initial right here and then the last name and making sure it fits within 40 characters. And then again, the lower is just making sure that everything is in lowercase. So once we have those base formulas, we are going to do a get records on the user object. The purpose of this one compared to the first one is we are getting a collection of records here where the username ends with that base username or the nickname ends with that base nickname. So we're getting all of those records, and the only fields that we need from this is the username and community nickname. The reason why we are doing ends with base username and base nickname will be revealed in just a little bit. So once we have a collection of all the usernames and nicknames or user records that have very similar usernames and nicknames, we are going to do a loop on that collection. Before we go ahead, this is what that looks like actually, just to show, and then the direction doesn't really matter as far as the loop goes. So next, we will check whether the username or nickname is available. Go into this decision. We will check the current item in the loop, so the current user record. We will see if that username ends with that base username, and if it doesn't, it just says that it's available. So if it's available, it just moves forward through the decision process to the next decision. But if it is not available, it's going to do this assignment element that is a username counter. Before going into that, we need to create a variable that it acts as your username counter. Now, this is a number variable with the default value of 0. That default value is very important because when we go into the assignment right here, we are basically going to add 1 to the username counter. And each time that it finds a user record that has a similar username, it's going to add 1 to that counter. So if it finds a Powell 3 times, the counter is going to equal to 3. The nickname decision, the nickname availability decision and assignment are very, very similar. They basically act as the same way, except this time it's going to be doing the community nickname and ends with base nickname. And the nickname counter is using the variable nickname counter, which is also a number variable with the default value of 0. The reason why we are doing a counter is because once we have gone through this entire process and we have found all of the records or user records that have nicknames and usernames that are very similar to what this new user's potential nickname and username is, we are going to want to make sure to make it unique to that particular user. So how do we do that? In this formula for the username. So this is actually very similar to the first base username that we showed earlier, but the only difference is it is adding this piece right here. If the username counter is greater than 0, then it will actually add the text version of that counter. So instead of a.powell at automatethiswithan.com, it is now going to look like, if there are 3 users with the similar usernames, it's going to look like 3 a.powell at automatethiswithan.com. That way it is truly unique to this particular user. And then for the nickname, it is going to look very similar again with the nickname. If the nickname counter is greater than 0, then add the text version of the nickname counter. So instead of a Powell, it's going to say 1 or 3 a Powell instead. Okay. So once we have those, we are going to start creating our records. The first record that you're going to want to create is an account record. You only need to create 1 record, and you will basically be filling out all of the information that you want in here. The main thing to input here, though, is the name, which is a required field on the account record, and the owner ID. For the owner ID, you specifically need to have a user assigned that has a role within your Salesforce instance. A portal user account owner cannot, or rather, an account owner of a portal user cannot have no role assigned to it. So they always have to have a role assigned if they're going to own a portal user's account. So make sure to add that in there. As a note, system administrators do not have roles assigned to them by default, so you're going to need to add in at least a role if you're going to be the account owner. Other than that, just input all the information that you want in here, and then we can move into creating the contact record. The main call out here is the account ID needs to be the account ID of the record that you just created. do make sure that is always inputted in. Otherwise, you're going to hit some errors saying that, specifically talking about that error I talked about before with the roles and potentially other errors. So make sure that account ID is set to that create account ID. And then just fill out any information that is required and map any of the fields that you want into the contact record. Once that is done, we are going to find the profile that we want to assign. The reason we do a get records for the profile instead of just using the standard ID for a profile is because there is it's variable whether or not it will actually work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't, for a variety of reasons. But if you do a get records instead and use the ID from this to set the ID for the user record, you are going to, it's basically foolproof at that point, rather than taking chances with actually hard coding in an ID. So we're doing a get records on the profile with the name that matches the name of whatever profile that you want to set for that user. I'm just using the standard partner community login user, but highly recommend creating a custom profile if you are dealing with anything Experience Cloud Portal profile-wise. So we only need the first record, and we only need the ID field for this record. Once you have that, we are finally going to create our user record. So in this user record, there's actually quite a few fields that need to be set that you wouldn't necessarily think of, such as the email encoding key. You need to specifically set that within the record. And in the blog, I will actually list out which fields you will need to include in this user record or create user record to make sure that you don't run into any issues in the long run. But some callouts is this community nickname is equal to that formula that I talked about, the for nickname, and then the username down here is equal to that username formula that I talked about earlier. The profile ID is equal to the get profile, get portal profile, get records that I just did with the profile ID in here. And the email is set to the email that we collected from the user. So once we have that create records, once we created the actual user, this will actually set off email to be sent to the actual user, which we saw earlier during the demo of the experience. It is basically the welcome email from the Experience Cloud portal itself. So please do make sure that those welcome emails are turned on, which I will show later where that would be. And that will require the user to set their password and then log in. So that is the very last element, is just telling them that they have signed up and to check their email to complete their registration. So of course, debug this, very similar to how Christina debugs hers. And then once it is good to go, activate it. And then a very important note, to be able to allow guest users access to this flow, you need to configure the accessibility on this flow specifically. So we have the portal self-registration flow right here. We are going to edit access here. We need to override the default behavior and restrict access to enable profiles or permission sets. I have just went ahead and added all of the profiles in here, but you basically just need to add in any profiles that need access to this particular self-registration flow. Once you have saved that, you also need to configure it for the Experience Cloud guest user portal profile as well, since you can't set that in here specifically. To do that, you would go into your site, find your site, and then go into the builder. And then from here, go into settings, general, and this guest user profile right here, configure access for guest or unauthenticated users. So we'll click into this. And then we are looking for the enabled flow access portion. I'm going to edit this, and then the self-registration flow that you have just made should pop up here, and then you're going to add it to the enabled flows column instead. That is going to allow guest users to actually access the flow once you have it set up. But first, before they can access it, we need to make sure they can we need to distribute the flow. So to do that, I have the login page right here pulled up. And in administration, we need to go to login and registration, scroll towards the bottom, and in this registration page configuration, we need to allow customers and partners to self-register. You might not have this quite yet, but you need to set this to Experience Builder page instead of the default page or anything else. And then you are going to choose which page you want that flow to be displayed on. I just picked the standard register page, which I will show in just a moment. But please do note that the pages in here are only going to display published pages. So you need to publish your portal first before actually making sure that it pops up here. Okay, so once we have that popped up, you don't need to set a profile or an account in here since the flow is going to be handling that anyways. And if we scroll up, we want to make sure that the login page type is actually an Experience Builder page instead of the default page, so that we can customize it and then set it to the login page, the standard login page within the builder. Once that is done, click Save, and then let's go into the builder. So this is the standard login page that comes in any portal org. And here at the bottom, there is a self-register link label when you click on the login form. This is basically controlling what this text says. This self-register URL specifically, you need to make sure is linked to that correct page that you want the flow to be displayed. I have it on this standard register page, so let's go in there. And basically, this is just a rich tech or rich content editor with my company logo, and then the flow that actually displays the portal self-registration flow. It's as simple as that. You just need to add that in there, and then get the URL for the page that houses that flow. Go back to the login and make sure that self-register URL houses that correct URL. Once you have that done, you will be able to publish it, and now guest users are going to be able to sign up by themselves without any assistance from your system administrator. A quick note, if you are not using the register standard page under the login and you decide to create a new page to house this flow component, you will need to make sure that that page, let's use messages as an example, you will need to make sure that that page is, actually let's create a standard page really quick as a test. You will need to make sure that that page access is set to public. That way, users do not have to go in and actually log in to sign up for your portal site. Once that is done, you are all set, and then you should have a self-register abilities without using any kind of system administrator interaction.
Great, thanks. And that was a really neat use case of Experience Cloud Yeah, that's very detailed. Thank you for that. All right, so we're going to recap what we learned in today's episode. So here's what we learned from Christina. Automatically run a screen flow when a user logs into Experience Cloud, and then how to only run that screen flow the first time a user logs into Experience Cloud. And lastly, update the user's related contact record based on the information we gathered in the screen flow. And what we learned from Anne was how to use a flow to self-register Experience Cloud portal users, gather information using screen flows, and create user contact account and other related records. Now, next month, we will showcase how you can take your screen flows to the next level with reactivity. So we will be joined by Salesforce MVP Michelle Hansen, Senior Solution Consultant at Salesforce, Josh Dament, who will share how he uses his AppExchange data fetcher with reactive components. And lastly, Salesforce Automation Product Manager Adam White will give us a sneak peek into what's in store in Winter 24 for screen flows. You can subscribe to the Salesforce Admin's YouTube channel so you'll be aware of the new content, and we'll let you know when the live stream page is up. So now it's your turn. When you need to learn, hit the trails. So complete the streamlined self-registration for Experience Cloud Sites trail. Well, that's a mouthful. And next, get your hands dirty. No better way to learn but to actually do it. So take Christina's and Anne's solutions, and the blog post will be available tomorrow for you to access, and then give it a spin yourself. And then lastly, read Salesforce MVP Hall of Famer Rakesh Gupta's Automation Champion blog, Restricting Login Flows to Execute Only Once. So get great content produced for you admins. Visit our website, admin.salesforce.com, to find the latest blogs, podcasts, and videos. And listen to the Salesforce Admins podcast hosted by Mike Gerhold and Jillian Bruce at all the places that you get your podcast content. And lastly, watch the past episodes of Automate This via our playlist on the Salesforce Admins YouTube channel. Well, I want to thank you ladies for being my guests on Automate This. Christina and Anne, you both were awesome.
Thank you so much for having me again.
Yeah, thank you for having me for the first time.
And we hope to have you both back again.
Hope so
Absolutely.
too.
And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Automate This. I look forward to seeing you at future sessions. And remember, the best way to be notified when we live stream is to set the reminder on the live stream episode page. And you get an email reminder the day of the event. We'll also post upcoming sessions on all of our various social channels, so follow us on Twitter at Salesforce Admins, LinkedIn, and the Trailblazer community.